Hello and welcome everyone to our very special sleep seminar series. Today we're talking about the role of diet in sleep, and I'm really glad that you could join us. I can just see people coming in now. Thank you very much, those that are joining. But we'll just get straight into it. Even if you're having trouble with the link, etc., you can watch this later. I first wanted to acknowledge the land on which we're all meeting, and to acknowledge that I am coming today from the land of the people of the Kulin Nation, the Wurundjeri land, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and respect to any First Nations people on the meeting today. I'd also like to acknowledge the inspiration that I personally and the Sleep Health Foundation gained from First Nations people's concept of health and community, and that you're only as healthy as your mob. It's not really an individual model. And we know that with sleep particularly, that there's so many whole of society factors, not just individual ones. But of course, we know, like we're going to talk about today, that there's things we can do with our diet, but there's a real acknowledgement that it's not just an individual focus. We have these community-facing webinars from the Sleep Health Foundation. We're a not-for-profit organisation that's been around for over 10 years, trying really hard to promote the importance of sleep and raise awareness of sleep and to advocate for sleep health issues. And we've started these series of webinars in the last year to bring good information from a variety of topics, a variety of experts straight to the community. So we're community facing, and I know that some of the audience are our sleep health colleagues and other professionals, but we're really glad to see that a whole lot of the general public are coming to these webinars, and we really welcome you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Simone, very special guest we have today. Simone Austin is an accredited practicing dietitian, advanced sports dietitian, and chief health officer at Healthy Life. She has a passion for optimizing performance and health through nutrition, and this has seen Simone achieve a very impressive 30-year career. Simone was the dietitian for Hawthorn Football Club for 12 years, and prior to this, she worked for the Australian men's cricket team and Melbourne Storm rugby team and more. So Simone regularly provides guest commentary on TV and radio and contributes articles for print and online publications. Simone is dedicated to her profession, that's for sure, having been president of Sports Dietitians Australia for 5 years and is a current board member of Dietitians Australia. So very, very lucky to have Simone today. She's currently the Chief Health Officer and Chair of the Health Advisory Board at Healthy Life, and she leads the publication of the Living Healthy reports, which you might get to today. So welcome, Simone.
Thanks, Moira. It's a great topic to be talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we know that sleep is just as important as diet and exercise, but it hasn't had the the coordinated response and the funding and the attention that diet has. But we know that sleep is so important. So I've got a whole lot of questions to fire at you, and I hope we get through to them. I'll get through them all. Just want to let people at home know that we don't have the chat function active, but any questions that you have, please put them in the Q&A. Start putting the questions in straight away, but I just let you know that we'll probably just do them at the end. Probably about 10 minutes to go, we'll start to answering the questions, but I'll keep an eye on that. And if there's anything really pressing, I'll interrupt Simone. So first of all, Simone, we'll start with a broad question of why does diet influence our sleep?
And I think one bit to acknowledge there is that, Moira, you've taught me an awful lot about sleep, as Moira sits on our Healthy Life Advisory Board as well. So that's sleep and diet have been something I've been thinking about more of, thanks to yourself. And probably we'll talk about range of it. But if we start from the start, is that diet affects sleep because it's part of diet influencing our biological clock. And we often think about sleep with light and jet lag and things that might be making us sleep well or not well, but diet also has an impact on our biological clocks. So at times our body thinks, yeah, I should be eating now during the daytime, and I should be, what I like to say is sort of like closing down the factory in the evening. It wants to be resting, so the digestion process probably doesn't want to be happening. So it can affect our sleep by when we eat. So try and keep the timing of your eating to when your body thinks it's going to eat, which is during the day, around sort of that 10-hour period, and try and bring your food earlier in the evening, not when you're just about to go to bed, because that can have a big negative impact on your sleep.
And absolutely, I think Australian researchers too, they're really punching above the weight of the world with good research with shift workers and time of food overnight. And I know that one of your conferences you've been to, you've had
Yeah.
an expert talk about that recently. So that's
Yes.
that's for another day, really, about shift workers. I mean, some of the audience might be shift workers, but in general, I think whether you're working at night or sleeping at night, to be very aware of the timing of the food.
Yeah, and planning when you're eating. So thinking about structuring other activities around your life, getting the food in as well. So if you're going to go to the gym later in the evening, it might mean that you actually have your evening meal, the heavier meal, earlier, rather than putting it off to be later, where it might be then negatively impacting your sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think there's so much to talk about. But one of my next questions is another sort of broad one. But how should we eat better for better sleep?
And people might think this is a bit boring, but one of the things is to eat basically a healthy diet. And what does that mean? Well, probably one of the ways to say it is it's like a pattern of eating. So if we think about probably the one that's got the most research around it is a Mediterranean style of eating. And the reason why that's maybe good for our sleep is there's a lot of fibrous foods in there. If you think it's got a fairly plant-based diet, vegetables, legumes, lentils, fruit, whole grains, those sorts of nuts, seeds. And those sorts of foods are really good for our gut bacteria, feed our gut health, keep our digestive system going, and they can all impact positively on our sleep as well. And that pattern of eating doesn't have a lot of sugary foods or high sugary foods, doesn't have a lot of takeaway or fast or high fat foods, which can impact our sleep negatively. And despite what people think when they think of someone from Italy or France thinking of wine, yes, they have wine, but it's generally in moderation. So their alcohol intake is actually, in general, on that pattern of eating, not high. And we can talk about alcohol a bit later, but probably the takeaways to start is think about where you can add an extra handful of veggies to your diet. That's a good way to start eating. Where can I add some legumes and lentils? And that might actually be the start of eating well to support your sleep.
Is it, I mean, I'm sure, I mean, it's true to say that sort of the less fresh or the more barcodes or preservatives or numbers on what we're eating will have an impact, a negative impact on sleep. Wouldn't
Yeah,
it?
I think we just have to be careful in that processing food, there's some food we just need to process. So if you're having legumes or lentils, whatever, the only way you can eat them is really if they're cooked a bit. So if you're buying canned food, such as canned legumes or lentils or vegetables, they're absolutely okay. It's probably those foods that you then don't recognize, the ingredients you cannot recognize anymore because they've been so highly processed in things like confectionery and lollies and cakes and that sort of thing. So where they're very not the whole food left anymore, that's what we're saying. Yes, yeah, for sure. Whole foods are the best way, but they can be frozen, fresh, or canned.
So is that so this whole Mediterranean diet we hear a lot about, like where do we start? Like, what do you recommend? So mostly is it the handful of nuts, etc., and the legumes when we can.
Thinking of your meal planning, we often previously would plan our meals around, what's for dinner? Chicken, meat. You go with the protein first. So it's probably starting off planning your meals so that the vegetable is the hero of the meal. And that's probably a good place to start, that you will be more like a Mediterranean style eating, because it will be roasted cauliflower and capsicums and tomatoes for dinner with the chicken or the meat. Or it might be a soup with the lentils or legumes in it. So try and plan first around the plant foods, and that will be a good way to start.
Yeah. I get asked all the time, like, from, speaking on the radio or at a conference or, people say, what shall I eat? What are the certain foods, like sort of almost sort of superfoods or, that could actually help us with their sleep? Is that a myth? Are there certain foods?
People will often talk about a warm glass of milk before bed, or bananas or things like that. And there's nothing wrong with a warm glass of milk. It's part of that relaxing, and whether it's the milk or is it just the ritual that's helping. But there is a little bit of research behind kiwi fruit. I think that, but it's quite rigid then, and the research really shows for people who already have sleep problems that maybe 2 kiwi fruit an hour before bed. There's nothing wrong with that. That's healthy. But I think you really could expand it to eating just general fruit. The other one is around tart cherry juice. There's often quite a lot of talk about that. And that's probably more because the cherries and even the kiwi fruit, they talk about it having a bit of melatonin. And that's the hormone that we talk about that helps us go to sleep. However, I don't think you suddenly down tart cherry juice and eat kiwi fruit and you're going to have a good night's sleep. So I think it's really important that the studies were in people who already had some issues and that they were possibly improving their sleep. I think if you just eat plenty of fruits and vegetables and avoid eating too late at night and some of those other things that we might talk about, that's more important than trying to find one magic food.
Yeah, that's really important. I think it's a huge thing that people, because you're so desperate when you're not sleeping well, it's a terrible state of affect. You feel desperate and you'll Google or you'll search for anything. And if you see that cherry juice or kiwi fruit is going to be, you might just sort of start eating, bucket loads of it. And it's really important for people to realize that, of course, just eating generally healthy is good. And those studies, like, a couple of very small studies, small numbers. The kiwi fruit one wasn't a randomized controlled trial. So, those sorts of really, people have to have a lot of caution around that. But having said that, there is, some evidence that some fruit, and people will just have to, do a bit of trial and error, I think, for what works well for them.
I think we've got some more impactful things that we can talk about, though, that people might be able to do.
Absolutely. Because I think that, I think it's probably, the timing and, overeating, etc. So I think it's kind of avoiding what not to do, I think, just trying to sleep.
So that's what I was saying maybe at the start, is trying to move your evening meal earlier. So if you can leave a couple of hours before your last main meal and going to bed, that means that your body's done most of the digestion and it can be really quietened down. Because to go to sleep, your body doesn't want a lot of activity. You don't want to be trying to digest a large food. So earlier the eating's better. And avoiding, that feeling that you have after you've had Christmas dinner or a big load of fish and chips.
Yes.
And you think, I feel so heavy, I could go to sleep. However, you probably don't, because you're just feeling so heavy and full. And high-fat foods take a lot of time to digest. So we don't want to be having a big load of a high-fat food before we go to bed, because it is more likely to make it difficult to go to sleep. So a bit lighter in the evening.
Yeah. So so I mean, rule of thumb, I guess, is there any kind of rule of thumb with hours before bed?
A couple of hours before bed is great for your main meal to be finished, but also learning to eat until we're comfortable. So eating more slowly, eating more mindfully, and realizing if we give ourselves a little bit more time to eat a bit slower, our body will tell us when we've had enough to eat, and we'll avoid that overeating, because it's that overeating that often sends us into that sort of food coma, but not necessarily promoting good sleep. It can be quite uncomfortable sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that little snack before, I mean, sometimes I know that even, a lot of older people, my grandparents, my parents, I remember them having a supper. Yeah, a supper with some hot milk or something like that. Tiny bit of food. I think that's, I don't tend to do that myself, but maybe it's a bit of more of an old-fashioned thing.
Yeah, I think if they've had dinner earlier, because if you think about your grandparents, they probably ate dinner quite early. I think traditionally people ate dinner earlier, so therefore supper maybe stopped you waking up in the evening hungry. So you've got to work out for yourself. You don't want to wake up hungry, but you also don't want to delay going to sleep because you're too full.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's quite individual on your needs.
Yeah. And I think a big topic in terms of, we're talking about diet and what goes into our mouth, drinks as well. So I want to ask about the two hot topics really are alcohol and caffeine. I'll start with alcohol.
Yes.
Tell me about alcohol and sleep.
So definitely, even though you think that the alcohol might help you sleep by having a little nightcap, because it might relax you, it will affect your quality of sleep. So it's certainly over having a couple of drinks, so more than particularly 2 standard drinks, alcohol will start to have a diuretic effect. So it means it can get you up at night and make you need to go to the toilet, which disturbs your sleep, but it also has an effect on you going into your deep sleep. So, and your quality sleep, you tend to wake up more, So therefore, alcohol isn't a tool to go to sleep. So that's probably the biggest thing. It's not a tool to go to sleep.
Right.
Caffeine and
Yeah.
hydration. Also, you tend to get dehydrated from alcohol. So making sure that you have some water before you go to bed.
Yeah.
The other one, caffeine, you were talking about. Well,
Yes.
we all, Melbourne, which we're both from, is certainly what we would call the capital of coffee. So I'm not suggesting people can't enjoy coffee. They certainly can. But we are all very individual in how we metabolize or break down caffeine. And it is affected by a gene. So some people are quite fast at metabolizing caffeine, and they'll say they could have a coffee at 4 o'clock and it's not going to affect their sleep. And that can be quite true. Other people are like, no, can't have one after 2 o'clock or it will affect my sleep, because caffeine does have a long half-life. But for some people, it's more effect than others. So I think you really need to be individual to really know your body as to when you need to have your draw line to stop and not have your caffeine after a certain time, because it can impact your sleep. So usually the earlier, the better.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
And
other
I think,
one,
go on.
sorry.
I mean,
My other one on fluid also is actually water. And I'll remember back when I was working with the Australian cricket team and talking very much about the importance of hydrating, particularly when they're playing in 5-day tests, playing in countries such as India or even Australia in summer. They would want to go to bed with clear urine and really hydrate a lot. But the problem is, if you have too much, it's going to affect your sleep. And sleep for any sort of performance is so important, particularly sporting performance. So we want to be hydrated, but not at the detriment to getting up. So if you are getting up to go to the toilet more than once in the evening, and assuming you don't have any bladder problems or continence issues, then you might actually want to pull back how much water you have close to bedtime. So having it earlier in the day, or looking at your fluids that you're having. So plain water, if you're guzzling it all at once, your kidneys will tend to filter it out. So spread it out over the day, and also look at fluids that have got some electrolytes. So that's why milk is actually quite a good one. It's a best sports drink. It has electrolytes, which means you'll absorb it more rather than just it going out and maybe waking you up to go to the toilet.
And I think the caffeine story over the last 5 to 10 years particularly is slightly different now too, with the sort of other drinks, caffeinated soft drinks. Yeah.
So
People sort of underestimate, I think, the caffeine in them.
And also they forget, they might count their coffee, but forget that black tea's got caffeine, green tea's got caffeine, energy drinks have actually got quite a lot. And also how strong your coffee is. Are you asking for a double shot? Are you having it, rather than an instant coffee? So knowing the strength of your coffee also, and how many other foods you might have had with caffeine in the day, that can certainly impact your sleep. And I've had a lot of people think green tea doesn't have caffeine, but it does. So we need to be careful of that. Maybe go for herbal teas.
Yes. And we have a fact sheet on our Sleep Health Foundation website about different types of caffeine and the amounts in different things. Fantastic. And we do say roughly 400 milligrams per day should not affect sleep, particularly if it's many, many hours before bed. And that 400 milligrams would be roughly 4 normal black teas across the whole day, which seems a lot to me. Someone like that'd be a lot for me. Talk about that individual metabolism. I'd be a bit sort of wired on that.
Too much for you.
Coffee, strong coffees, like from a cafe.
Yes.
Roughly 2 of those or so would be 400 milligrams. But so I think it's important for people to start thinking about what's actually in their coffee, because it's like an instant might be 85 milligrams, and a really strong one at the cafe might be 250 milligrams.
And then them understanding the impact of sleep beyond just feeling tired, in that sleep can then affect your cravings for your food. So then you have your cup of tea, and if you're feeling really tired, or your coffee, and you're having that as a pick-me-up, because it becomes a vicious circle, and you haven't had enough sleep, you go for caffeine as a pick-me-up, then you might go for the sweet sort of foods, then you don't sleep as well, and we sort of go around in circles.
Absolutely. I know. I think that, can you tell us more about that in terms of the cravings and the sort of the hormones that get disrupted, I think, with our
so people
sleep?
heard of ghrelin and leptin, and they're hormones that control your appetite. So when we have lack of sleep, we tend to throw those hormones a little bit out of their normal level and their sync. So it affects the part of the activity in your brain, and it really tends to mean that you lose that best ability to know when you're full, and you often crave other foods. So ghrelin promotes hunger and leptin that feeling of full. And so if you upset that, then you may actually be overeating compared to what you normally want to eat. Also, the lack of sleep affects the part of the brain that influences your food desirability and pleasure. And food is more than nutrients, it's very much pleasure. So then what happens is we can sometimes actually want those sweet or sugary foods more than we may have normally had. So it's not because you're poor willpower, it's because your brain is actually driving you to have those foods. So if we're looking at weight management, we're looking at wanting to eat nourishing food to make us feel better over the long term, then we need sleep, because our sleep will then help control our appetite, and our sleep will help control our cravings. And then that also just helps control your metabolism and our feeling of energy, rather than that quick fix energy that we might be looking for if we haven't had enough sleep.
Absolutely. And I think it's until recently just wasn't talked about enough. And I know that so people might be getting up at 5 a.m. to do their gym, and they're being really, watching their food and quite restrictive, and they're not losing weight. And sometimes adding in, maybe it's just extra hour of sleep, and perhaps an evening, not every single morning getting up at 5 o'clock, just getting a bit more sleep. People can think, oh wow, my metabolism, things are different. My food intake, my metabolism's different now. I'm losing that weight.
Yes, because people can often beat themselves up a bit about when they're craving food, and that often you need a bit of self-compassion about that, because it's not because you're weak or you don't have the willpower. It's often because we're tired, and so our body is trying to find a way to get some instant energy, and its hormones are not happy. So certainly it's not that, go harder or go home at the gym or with exercise. It is finding that balance between diet, exercise, sleep, and a bit of self-compassion. So
Yeah,
I'm not getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, Maura. That's not for me. I like my sleep.
Only if you're a morning type and it suited you, and you're still
absolutely
it suits a lot of people. But
yeah,
I know one of my colleagues, he was Ian Dunican over in WA. He does a lot of work with athletes and sleep. And he says, like, sleep in and win, like elite sports teams, like, sleep in, forget that early morning, get sleep, bit more sleep, and you start winning games.
Absolutely.
So I'm just mindful of time. I want to really recap what do we, in a nutshell, what do we need to remember and know about the role of diet in sleep?
Yeah. So I think the things to remember are, for a good night's sleep, it comes back to some of those general guidelines. Plenty of the plant-based foods, having some lean protein in there, not having all, not deep frying your food and putting all that sort of high fats, having your healthy fats like nuts, seeds, avocados, and extra virgin olive oil. That's your good start. And then really being in tune with yourself, eating into your comfortable rather than eating to your overfull. And some practical things of trying to move your food within a period that's not too late. And it's in that daylight hours when your body actually, the biological clock, wants to eat. So moving that evening meal a bit earlier, you might even move breakfast slightly later, but it's not about fasting. It's not about skipping meals to promote sleep. Spread throughout the day is a good way to do it. And then caffeine, being in tune with your own body around how much caffeine and when is best for you. And you can have genetic tests even to check whether you're a fast caffeine metabolizer or not, but really you can probably tell for yourself. Alcohol, don't use it as a means to go to sleep. Think about how much suits you and when you're drinking or not, but certainly less alcohol is going to promote better sleep. And I think thinking about that, same with babies, sleep promotes sleep. So once you do that, good diet and your sleep, they do work hand in hand. And if you can get them syncing together, then a good diet will promote sleep. Sleep will promote your good diet because of the way it controls your hormones. So I think if you can think those two together, it's a great way to do it. And if you're looking for more resources, the Sleep Health Foundation, as you mentioned, have some really good articles. But where I am at Healthy Life, we also have a free sleep health program. We have lots of articles around sleep and benefits for sleep. And if you're looking to improve your diet for sleep, we have a really cool tool called the Food Tracker tool. And Food Tracker is a free way to look at how your shopping compares to the Australian Dietary Guidelines. So that might be a good one. And the Living Healthy Report's got some great tips about exercise, sleep, and diet as well. So you can Google those with Healthy Life.
Great, that's fantastic. We've got. I'm just going to put another slide while I'm answering the questions.
Okay. We have got a question there, which is about what about the role alpha-lactoalbumin whey protein in sleep? That's quite a good question in that. Particularly when I've been working with athletes, there's often thoughts about maybe topping up with protein before you go to sleep, and that might help with muscle mass, might help you sleep. I think, again, it's something that I'm probably not that absolute expert in, but some protein and the thoughts of it and that milk, it's around that milk sort of philosophy, is that it might promote some sleep. But again, it's not about sort of overdoing it. You know, it's not going to suddenly send you to sleep, but it might be something that can help you sleep. And also the protein not to wake you up also when you're sleeping. So yes, it could be a tool, but it's not a be all and end all. Yeah.
And same with, Lisa also asked, food with tryptophan promotes sleep.
Okay, and again, that's an amino acid. It's related to the melatonin and our hormone relation. So it's a bit like, you know, you could pull out the kiwi fruit or the tart cherry juices or things like that. So again, it's not going to suddenly send you to sleep because you've had your milk or your bananas or your blueberries or other things that might be related there. Not saying it won't help, but it's got to be part of an overall diet. So there might be things that add to the helping, but if you're eating a massive meal before you go to bed and you happen to have some foods with tryptophan, or you've had a lot of alcohol, the tryptophan's not going to counteract those things. But certainly it's okay to eat those foods and it may help.
Yeah, I think that I really like that balanced approach, because that's what we need with sleep health particularly. It's there's a lot of individual variation, and it's quite complex. Like, it's no wonder that there's a lot of Australians have trouble with sleep, because there's a lot of factors regulating our sleep. And one of them, of course, is food and drinks, and, you know, what we put into our mouths. But it's, as you've pointed out, it's about sort of attitudes as well. It's about expectations. It's around timing. It's around knowing what works for you. And so I think that's I love that there's this overall, you've got the science and the knowledge around food, but also there's this, people have to understand that there's not going to be a easy one fix. Yeah, there's not going to be one thing that you can eat a ton of, or one thing only to avoid. I can say anecdotally, I suppose, in many, many decades of working as a clinician with sleep and people with sleeping difficulties as a psychologist, and nearly all of them they haven't had caffeine for X amount of years, probably, you know, 10, 5, 6 years, they haven't had any kind of caffeine. And yet here they were still having troubles with sleep. So sometimes it was kind of counterintuitive to say, we're going to put a morning coffee back into your life.
Because you'll enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah, because you enjoyed it. And it was, and that's moderation, and that's not harmful. You know, generally, you know, I wouldn't have thought anyone would have harm from one caffeinated beverage a day.
Yes.
Yeah. So if there's any other questions.
And so these are all around that. Those two questions are around the, you know, the tryptophan and coming into the serotonin and melatonin, and that's what some supplements look at as well. And again, I think we have to be really cautious that supplements are not necessarily going to suddenly again bang and give you a good night's sleep either. So it is, as Moira said, it is that whole rounded part. It's relaxing before you go to bed. It is enjoying foods that you enjoy, because if that gives you enjoyment, then that can help with just general relaxation and well-being and health, and that can help you sleep as well. So it's a very complex chain that all goes around, doesn't it? It's like a big ball, I think, and I feel like it likes plasticine, and you have to mold different things at different times. And sometimes diet will be playing more part for you. Other times it might be that exercise is more important because that's relaxing you and de-stressing you. So I think also through your life journey, what might come up and down can also be can be different. And our diet, particularly through different ages and life stages, me going through menopause at the moment and sleeping is an issue that never has been, there can be different aspects that we might need to dial up or dial down based on our life stages. So thank you, everyone.
Absolutely. So we'll finish on that note, and I really want a round of applause, virtual round of applause. Thank you so much, Simone. That was really, really appreciate your wisdom and your insights and your expertise with talking about sleep. Thank you, everyone. And I've just got the slide up there with you. I'd really love you to encourage to follow Sleep Health Foundation on our socials. Go to that QR code for our sign up for our newsletter, have a look at our website, our 100 different fact sheets on a range of topics.